dangerously close. This episode was brought to you by William Mitchell Audio. Now, some people in the wrestling community have said that I'm going to run out of William Mitchell Audio jokes just because this is the 34th William Mitchell Audio ad. Well, here's a joke for you. William Mitchell Audio is going to remix everything I just said into a fantastic bounce New Orleans beat. And then we will start the interview. Some people in the wrestling community have said I'm going to run out of audio jokes just because this is the 30 William Mitchell Audio ad. My guest today is Casper ter Kuile. Oh, I'm not even on the thing. Sorry. All right. Casper's work explores how we'll make meaning, deepen our relationships, and experience beauty in the 21st century, whether convening, studying, writing, or speaking. He's always weaving together tradition and innovation, levity and profundity, the secular and the sacred. He finds ways to ennoble the everyday and create the conditions for joyful belonging. He believes in the transforming power of small groups, the vitality of commitment, and the liberating potential of good theology. And he delights in talking with soulful corporate leaders about ancient wisdom and with forward-thinking religious leaders about trends shaping our culture. Casper is the author of The Power of Ritual, the co-founder of the Nearness Sacred Design Lab, and the podcast Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. His work has been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, Vice, and on NPR. He has spoken widely on community trends, ritual, and emerging spirituality at the Aspen Ideas Festival, Cannes Lions Festival, Stanford University, numerous religious institutions, and now finally he's made it to the big time. My views are my own podcast.
I've been dreaming of this day when I was a little boy.
You have reached the ivory tower of the My Views Are My Own podcast. What's up, Casper?
Hey, how you doing, Doug? Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And it's great to have you. I'm glad we finally got this worked out. I know we had a couple snags.
You had the baby.
And it was an emergency. I think I emailed you from the hospital.
Yes, I was like, this guy needs to get off his phone and tend to his family.
Yeah, I lived in that hospital for a week, and I was like,
wow.
I was like, oh, I think I have a podcast. I was like, hey, man, I'm not going to be able to do it from here.
Yeah, seriously.
But speaking, so before that, when we first started talking about you coming on the podcast, I was like, hey, do you want to do a Saturday? And you were like, no, that's my Sabbath. And which I just took to mean, oh, that's your day off. And I was like, okay, cool. But then later I found out that you literally take 24 hours, no internet, no text messages, no devices. And it's like sacred time. Why did you decide to make that a part of your life?
Oh, I needed it.
Yeah, no doubt.
Honestly, it was one of those, like, I love people. I'm very social. I love being around people. I love connecting with people. You know, I pride myself on that fast email response most of the time. But I just got to a point about 8 years ago where I was just constantly overwhelmed and felt drained and tired. And I read this little book by Abraham Joshua Heschel, this great theologian and rabbi and educator in the 20th century. And it was such a great, inspiring, practical read because he was talking about the practice of Sabbath and the way in which it had sustained people through, generations. And I love the idea that it was a palace in time. And I love that you described it as sacred time because it feels like when, the sun sets on a Friday night and you can see stars in the sky, that's the moment when you kind of transition into the sacred time. And I've always loved ritual. I grew up, not in a religious home, but in a home that had a lot of rich community and ritual life and fun family traditions that now I realize are kind of weird, but make our family life a
That's
good one.
family, man.
That's family, exactly. And so, I started to just like light a candle and sing a little song that I grew up singing in summer camp, which was about like saying goodnight to the sun. And it felt like I was walking across this bridge of like email and inbox and stress and phone calls and work and deadlines into this like ocean quiet,
Yeah.
this kind of just idyllic space of when no one needed something from me, or I felt like no one needed something from me, or maybe the best way to say it is like I felt I had permission to just rest. And so I would find myself doing things like writing really bad poetry or like drawing, even though I suck at drawing. It was just like space for creativity. And I would have a nap or I would stare out of the window. And like, if my phone is on, I'm not doing any of that shit. And so
Yeah.
I found it incredibly helpful to just set that time aside. And I started posting online. The work isn't done, but it's time to stop. Every time I was about to turn off my phone. And
Yeah.
people have told me since that they like wait for that tweet to like give themselves permission. And so I love this idea of kind of, drawing on that Jewish tradition and kind of making it my own, because I'm not Jewish, so I don't want to claim that I'm doing the full thing, but at least being inspired by it and kind of doing this tech Sabbath, which, it's been life-saving.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So I recall I was, like I said, we got a little postponed. I read your book, but it's been a minute, so like it's
Yeah.
not as fresh in my mind, nor is my mind fresh at all because I'm severely sleep deprived. But
Doug, can I actually ask you about that time in the hospital? Like,
yeah,
because it's such an intense time. Like,
it
what
was
what did you learn from it?
it was well, so much of it was like being a zombie almost because I
Yeah,
wasn't sleeping at all.
yeah.
And it was extremely unexpected. So my son was born 6 weeks early.
Wow.
Uh, but he's extremely, he's good. He's so healthy. All the nurses in the NICU were like, oh,
Wow.
he's a show off because he was, he's premature, but he was, every
Yeah.
day they're like, oh wow, like this is something that a lot of kids take weeks to.
Right. Lung
Like
capacity.
I got to take him home
Yeah.
after a week, which is pretty
Wow.
cool. But yeah, the time in there was just so gnarly because I was sleeping on a plastic couch,
Oh,
when I was sleeping. But let's rephrase that. I was laying on a plastic couch, and then uh, they have this thing called care time, which is the time that you're allowed to interact with your
right.
child. Otherwise, you're not supposed to touch them because they're still like because they're supposed to be in the womb still.
Right.
It's not good for them
To be
like
exposed and
physiologically, and it's not
right.
good for their brain development to be touched or for them to have a lot of sensory.
Yeah.
So I would just like wait for the care time, which was every 3 hours. So every 3 hours, I would go down,
Mm.
and eventually they would like let me change his diaper and stuff. And it was kind of an unforgettable experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
So
just
intense.
just hanging out in the cafeteria, just eating like grilled cheeses and staring.
Yeah.
Everybody got
So
to know
cool.
me. I got like it was kind of weird because they have our hospital, the hospital we went to. Shout out St. Thomas. Like I was. It's like extra super safe. Obviously these days, so like there's lots of like if there was a shooter, they wouldn't
Yeah.
make it far because they could like lock them in any corridor in the building. But what also
Wow.
means if you want to walk around freely, which is what I was trying to do some of the time, it's someone has to like you have to buzz someone and then someone has to let you through. But it got to the point where, because I was doing a lot of wandering, uh, it got to the point where everyone knew me. Like
Yeah.
they were like, "Oh, that's that guy that stumbles around the halls, for several hours." And they just like, I get to the door and they just let me through.
It's like, oh yeah, we know that guy.
Yeah, this guy, he's been here 10 times today.
Beautiful. Wow.
But then it was also it got easier once my girlfriend could go in a wheelchair, which took a couple days. But once I had her in the wheelchair, free access. They saw us coming. They're like, let them through. Mom in a wheelchair.
I love it. The walks became like your daily your route.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
I
beautiful.
mean, a week in a hospital, it's a long time to be in a hospital.
Yeah. Yeah.
My longest time before that was I had a surgery, like a appendectomy, and that was 2 days, and I thought that was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, oh,
But
sorry, go ahead.
no, I'm just connecting that to the Sabbath conversation, because both of them are this idea of like time out of time, right? You're away from your normal life, you're away from your normal routines. And I think one of the beautiful things about spirituality and ritual is that it helps us cross these boundaries, right? From like normal life into a special time, like on a pilgrimage, or a, week and a half in a hospital, or into, a time of rest. And so, it's a major change. And I think we're missing so many of the kind of rituals that help us make sense of these big transitions, whether they happen every week or whether they happen, hopefully once in a lifetime. But it's such a powerful story, I think, because it illustrates, it's so disorienting, right? Like when you're in that time and in that space and you're not in control and you're just hoping everything's going to be okay. So I'm so glad it was.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, it all worked out amazing. And he's already got like super cool hair. Are you familiar with Jeremy Renner in Avengers? The hair he's got.
Yeah, with the kind of like mohawk style a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just posted that. My son was born with that hair, and so I
Amazing.
posted a side by side photo of him and Jeremy Renner, and I was like it's uncanny. He like just straight up has spiky, cool mohawk hair. So
I love it.
I feel like he might be a rock star.
Trendsetter. Yeah, exactly.
Hey, I want to ask you a really tough question.
Yeah.
Okay. um, which is better, Sleepless in Seattle or You've Got Mail?
Oh, easy answer. You've Got Mail is the greatest movie of all time.
Okay.
At least in my book.
For anyone listening, if you think that I'm just, because I do occasionally just jump the rails, there's a point to that question. The question is just something that you write about and believe in, obviously, and we'll talk about You've Got Mail some in this, I'm sure, but it's the idea that something as simple as watching an old movie can have a deep ritual importance. I don't know if like, you know what, actually I'm just gonna let you speak on that, and like, because I know that You've Got Mail was kind of like, that was your ritual movie, right?
Yeah, and it didn't start out that way, but I noticed, and I watched that movie maybe for the first time when I was 12 or 13, and so it's such a great, for those of you who don't know it, it's this great kind of retelling of an old story of a movie called The Shop Around the Corner, which I think itself is based on a short story, but it's essentially these two people who communicate, in this case, over kind of DM in the late 90s, I think, and then email. And they don't know that they know each other in real life, and they fall in love on the internet, and in real life they're kind of rivals in the book business. And Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks play the lead, but for me, a lot of the joy is in the secondary characters, and the hilarious, like Parker Posey is just amazing in this movie.
Oh, she's in that? I didn't recall that. I haven't seen it in so long.
Oh, she's hilarious. But what I noticed was that I would come back to this movie when I felt really sad. Like it was would be moments where I felt like hopeless or really alone, or I would just want to watch this movie when I wanted some comfort. That's what it came down to. And I started to realize, like, I always watch it with some Haagen-Dazs. I always watch it by myself. Like, I actually don't want anyone else to watch it with me. Like, and so I was starting to realize, like, there's kind of like a ritualistic element to this. And it would also always take me from a place of, kind of, to use traditional theological words, from a place of desolation to a place of possibility, and a sense of a sense that life could be beautiful even if it was hard right now. And I think so many of us, whether it's listening to a particular album or rewatching a movie or rereading a book or going to a particular place, like, we have these things that are important in our lives, but we don't necessarily give them the status of being a ritual. And I'm really interested in helping us rediscover the rituals that we have in our own lives, because they are meaning-making tools. They help us connect to what's most important, the people we love, the values that we hold. And it's hard to do that by yourself, which is why I've gone on to do the work I'm doing now. But it really started with noticing these watching a movie over and over again, even though I know what's going to happen, right? Like, there's a one way of watching a movie where you're like, what happens in this Marvel movie? And there's another way of watching, like, I know exactly what happens, and that's why I want to engage with this.
Yeah, absolutely. I have I have two films for me personally.
Huh.
Uh, well, as a lot of people that listen to this already know, the film Aliens by Ridley Scott, starring Sigourney Weaver, and Muppet Treasure Island. And
Oh,
I've done an episode on both of those films.
I love it.
One of them is called "Is Aliens a Perfect Film?" and the other one is called "The 100th Episode." And for the 100th
Huh.
episode, we just dedicated it to Muppet Treasure Island.
I love it.
I
Muppet Christmas Carol is one of my favorites, but I've never seen Muppets Treasure Island, so I need to check that out.
it oh my god, do yourself just
Ooh.
give yourself this gift of Muppet Treasure Island.
Mm.
So obviously, it's for me, it has nostalgia. I started watching it as a kid, but I think it's Tim Curry's greatest performance as an
Wow.
actor. I think it's probably Kermit's best performance, Gonzo's best performance.
What does you mentioned nostalgia? Like, what does it make you nostalgic for? Like, what are you reconnecting with when you watch that
The
movie?
thing about it, for me, and I don't know if this applies in the same way that because when I was reading about what you were like when you were saying
You've got
with You've
mail.
Got
Yeah.
Mail, you actually like have some other adornments to it. Like you
Yeah.
have the Haagen-Dazs,
Yeah.
you watch it alone. You do this,
Right.
you make it into almost a ceremony. And
Yeah.
I didn't really have that with Muppet Treasure Island. I just started watching it when I was a kid, and then just never stopped watching it.
Yeah.
And also just recently did an entire podcast episode claiming that it's the greatest film ever made. But
Well, and now you're gonna like pass it on, to your kid. Like,
oh yeah.
it's kind of beautiful. Yeah.
Well, I even have I don't know how much of this story I really am willing to share.
Hmm.
I don't want to sound, but I do want to. It's about that film and it being like a great moment in my life.
Yeah.
Uh, I was like 18, so I was an adult, and I was
Yeah.
still I had that on still had it on VHS,
I love
and,
it.
and I would still like and I had I'll just go ahead and tell the story. You know what? I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm all I want people to know is that I'm not advocating dangerous behavior
I'm with you.
or substance abuse or anything.
I'm with you.
I'm not saying it's cool or okay to do. But
Yeah.
what had happened was I was conducting an experiment with a substance that was not considered legal,
Uh-huh.
and and just shortly thereafter, after my experiment, the reaction that I had was, "Oops, I took too much."
Let's not do that again. Yeah.
And then what I thought was going to be a fun time
Oh,
very quickly was
wow.
becoming like I was
Yeah,
not having fun. And you have those thoughts. You're like,
no doubt.
am I gonna die? Because
No
I
doubt.
so what I was and at the like I was supposed to hang out with my friends later, but like at this point, like I hadn't gotten around to that. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna watch Muppet Treasure Island.
Yes.
It always calms me down. It always
Safety.
makes me feel
Yes.
safe, happy. It's colorful, it's bright, it's got a lot of it's a musical.
It's Gonzo's best performance.
Gonzo
Yeah.
is excellent in it. I sat down, I watched the movie. I was like, I'm gonna let this drug wear off, and
Yeah.
and then it did. So
Yeah.
like the movie was over. I felt better. I'd come down, and I was like, okay, I I didn't die.
Yeah.
And then,
Totally.
but then my night just suddenly became a bunch of some of my best friends came over, picked me up. I didn't have a car at the time, and then this girl that I had been trying to holler at forever called me, and she was like, "Hey, you want to come over and like drink some 40s?" And I was like, "Do I ever?" And so
Absolutely.
I attribute that a lot to the magic of Muppet Treasure Island and the ritual therein. I don't know.
I love it
It's
so much because like one of the cool things about ritual, I always think about it, it's like traveling through time a little bit because when you come back to something time and time again, it connects you to all the other times that you've watched it. So now when you watch that movie, not only is it like safety and nostalgia, but it's also like, that girl giving you a call on this like intense experience, which was a little scary, but in the end was okay. And,
yeah.
you're kind of weaving this tapestry across time with this particular movie. It's so cool.
Yeah. I mean, and I never tire of it.
Right. Right. Well, that's the other thing that for me was this revelation when I went to divinity school and, we were doing traditional sacred text. So I was like sitting there with the Hebrew Bible and New Testament and things. And I was like, oh, this is, whatever. Like, I'm not so interested in this. But what I ended up being really interested in was the idea that we come back to the same text, not because necessarily the text is different, but because our lives are different. And the text acts as a sort of mirror. And so when we're coming back, and the text could be a book or it could be a movie. And so like we actually see new things in the text because our lives have changed. And so I love that it's like, it's never boring because like you're bringing your new year of experience, or you're bringing the new person that you are as a dad, right, to the next time that you're going to watch this movie. So there's always something new in the text because there's something new in our lives.
I did want to ask you about sacred reading, because like kind of what you were saying, speaking about being in divinity school and going back further in history. It's like if you say sacred reading, that the average person, they're going to think of like a monk, right? You know, or
totally
someone creating illuminations, like that's like the idea you would get. But like, let's say I don't want to be a monk,
right? Surprised.
But you're saying that that sacred reading is available to me. It's available to everybody, right? In some way. And I guess a question would be like, how? If it's let's say that you're kind of like me, like I don't have a religious background. I don't have it can just be, it could be anything, right? It could be any book at all. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. So for me, it's not so much what you're reading, but it's how you're reading it. And so sacred reading, and the way that I've learned and been practicing it, is really about the quality of attention that you bring to the text and the questions that you bring to the text and the way you interact with it. So for example, you mentioned kind of monks in some illuminated manuscript studio somewhere, painstakingly putting their ink on the vellum manuscript. And a lot of these practices come from the medieval period, both in the Christian and Jewish context, which are the ones I know best. But so, for example, there's a practice in the Christian tradition called Lectio Divina, or Lexio Divina, which literally means sacred reading. And what it does is it brings kind of 4 steps to a piece of text. So you would look at maybe a particular sentence or a paragraph or even a single word, and you ask yourself first, what's really happening in this passage, in this sentence? Like, what's happening at a kind of narrative level? And that's the way we usually read things, right? What's happening in the plot? Do I understand who's speaking? If it's a Russian novel and it's very complicated, often that's already hard enough. But then in the way that we've been practicing it on this podcast, and for me personally, is then you ask yourself, okay, what else does this remind me of? And so suddenly you're kind of opening your imagination. Let's say, the sentence on the page is, they walked into the opera house, right? Okay, well, if I have to kind of open my imagination, well, I'm thinking about opera houses, I'm thinking about performances, I'm thinking about walking into new spaces, being intimidated, maybe it's beautiful, right? You're just kind of really like letting yourself start to free associate wherever your mind goes. So you're opening up the text. And then we ask for the third question, what does this remind me of in my own life? And so I might think about times that I've gone into an opera house. My husband, when I met him, was an opera singer, so I have ended up learning a lot about opera. So it would make me think of him and my relationship with him and the fact that he no longer does that. And what does that mean? Endings. You kind of really start letting those gears run. And then finally, after you've reflected on this, maybe you've talked about it with a friend as they reflected too, then the final question in this 4-step process is, what do you want to take away from this conversation? Like, is there something you want to do? Is there an action you want to take, something you want to remember? And so suddenly this short phrase in a story about someone walking into the opera house is like helping me recommit to my marriage, right? Like, because I'm thinking about this person that I love and what it means for us to be married and go through big life changes together. And so sacred reading is just this amazing way of kind of looking into a mirror and seeing yourself anew. And it's really a tool of reflection and contemplation. And I love it because it's like if you're stuck, I mean, I really think you could do this with the phone book to some extent. But it's nice to do it with a book that you love or a story that you love. But it's like this amazing tool of meaning making, right? Taking something that looks flat and making it 3-dimensional.
Actually, this is something that I had meant to say up top, but now is as good a time as any. As when I was reading your book, man, it was kind of so I very much believe in synchronicity because it's just so apparent in my life, and also I'm so open to it. I see it more than others because
beautiful.
Maybe I'm even looking for it. or it's looking for me. But when I was reading your book, I was like, this is the perfect timing to be reading this book
Mm,
because there was so much in it. And I was like, this is so relevant to
mm,
me right now, you know,
mm.
and
What resonated? What was feeling like,
well, sacred reading to a very large extent, because
yeah.
as a matter of fact, I just named my son after an author, and so because he's named after Kurt Vonnegut, so his name's Kurt.
Wonderful.
And in a way, when Kurt Vonnegut passed away, I
Yeah.
actually felt a little bit like that was a
Oh yeah.
friend of mine that had died,
Oh
just
yeah.
because I had been so uh, connected to those books and to his
Yeah.
writing for my whole life. And similar to the story about the Muppets, there was, I think, when I was a teenager, I was
Mm,
very angsty, going through a lot of shit, and probably
mm,
that's when I maybe experienced some of the darkest times in my life, like emotionally,
yeah.
and probably maybe the lowest I ever really felt is when I discovered Kurt Vonnegut and I read
Mm,
Cat's Cradle, and
mm,
it completely flipped the way I was looking at
yeah.
the world, because the book, it's
Yeah.
the book, it's the way he writes, his outlook, everything, his ability to look at just the
Yeah.
worst parts of humanity and make it funny. And I was
Yeah.
like, you know what? What am I sitting here being a bummed out fucking bitch about? Like,
Mm.
I should just get out here and live life. So I
But I
passed.
love I love that so much because like that's for me why that stupid rom-com right means so much to me, is because those were the years when I was like figuring out my sexuality, living in a boys boarding school where I felt completely isolated. I like, and this movie held out this promise of like what life could be like, even for someone that felt like, I didn't fit. And the irony is I ended up moving to New York City because I feel like I'm living in a Nora Ephron movie.
Yeah.
Turns out the reality of doing that, not great. Rent is about to go up 32%. Like
Yeah.
it's awful. But I really, I guess what feels important to say is like your love for Kurt Vonnegut and your real emotional response to his death is not silly. Like that dude changed your life,
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think like using a word like sacred or spiritual for me is helpful because it elevates these things that are so important to us in our life experience. Even if maybe to the outside world they're like, oh yeah, it's a great book, but it's like it's not more than that. And it's like, actually it is. Like this shaped my life in a profound way. And there's nothing more meaningful than having that kind of impact on someone.
Yeah. And there was, I mean, there's more to to your book, specifically, like things that were
Yeah.
very much speaking to me. A
Yeah.
lot of it was too about community, uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and uh, as a matter of fact, I think I wrote a little note here about something that I wanted to say.
Mm.
It was what did I have this? Oh, it's well, it was kind of like you have a chapter. It's not. It's a part of a chapter where you talk about
Yeah.
people saying that CrossFit is their church.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but like, there's so much more. And I mean, that's one of the ones that really stands out because it's
Yeah.
kind of like a little bit shocking. Like people being like,
Right.
and some of the facts you said, that people are more likely to choose, like if they're buying a new home, they choose to live closer to their CrossFit gym than to like work
Yeah.
or like
Yeah.
for convenience. And I feel like for myself, I'm in the habit of building and participating in communities.
Yeah.
I always have been.
Yeah.
But I also know what it's like to feel lonely. Like
Mm-hmm.
kind of like I said earlier, and with uh, when I first got into Kurt Vonnegut, that was kind of like a lonely time.
Yeah.
Uh, and I feel like also for all of us, since 2020, there was a big
For real.
break in feeling like, there's a lot of isolation that just happened that way. And I was kind of just right now, I'm just in this process of rebuilding a lot of connections, a community, and getting reconnected with old friends,
Mm.
connecting with making new friends. And I guess there's a question in here. I promise.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's something like,
Yeah.
what's the importance, like
Yeah.
the way you think about it. What's the importance of building community, and how
Yeah.
can people do that in a world that feels progressively designed to be more isolating?
You're so right. You're so right. And all the data bears that out, right? We're spending more time by ourselves on average than any time before. this is the kind of the definitions, but social isolation are like the structural ways in which we spend more time alone. So working from home by ourselves. More of us are single. We get married later if we get married. Just the amount of time we spend by ourselves is record highs. We have less number of friends. We have fewer people over for dinner in our homes on average per year. Just all of those indicators are really, really clear. And then loneliness is the quality of our experience. So even if you're surrounded by people, you can still feel lonely because you feel disconnected from them. And so both social isolation and loneliness are on the rise. And I think it's because many factors, but what it's resulting in is this sense of feeling more alone, not just relationally, but kind of cosmically, right? Like that we just don't fit into a something. And the sad thing is that the more we feel that, the harder it is to build connections. And so I'm passionate about this because like through relationships, not only is it massively healthy, right? There's all of this data out now. Julianne Holt-Lunstad is a scientist who's just written with the Surgeon General an incredible report on the state of loneliness in America, if anyone wants to deep dive into the science. But she talks about the impact of loneliness being just as bad on our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day or being clinically obese. So like it is... Right. And so it just has this massive impact on our health, first of all. But secondly, it's so much more fun to be in community. Yeah. It's harder. It's harder. And I want to be honest about the costs of relationships too, because they can be complex. You can be, you know, you have to do shit for people, right? Like helping move house, or hey, like someone's just had a baby, right? I'm going to bring over a meal. But of course, what it means is that when you're in times of trouble, you'll receive it too. And so the kind of one of the big questions for me is like, what is the social and spiritual infrastructure of the future? Because we know that these traditional spaces like congregations and other, you know, like the Lions or the Rotary Club or the local bowling club, like all of that social infrastructure is moving down, is dying away. And yet we have like some signs of life, right? Like a gym or a maker space or a running club, but not necessarily the kind of places where you get to really go deep with people. And so that's been a big impetus for me for creating the Nearness, which is this new organization that my co-founder and I launched last year, where we're inviting people to sign up for an 8-week journey, and we match them in a small group. And small groups, I think, are the perfect size for the kind of deep, reflective conversations that you don't get to have in everyday life. And they need just a little bit more structure. And this is what I mean by like, the social infrastructure is like what's going to hold you in a conversation in a way that it isn't just dependent on you and me having coffee and me asking you maybe a deeper question, but there's like a prompt, and we know it's going to take 90 minutes, and we're going to start by taking a couple deep breaths, and we're going to end with, there's like a ritualized way in which you're having the conversation. And it's been amazing to see. I mean, and not just here, it can be men's groups, can be recovery groups. Like as long as we're in a group somewhere, I don't mind what it is, but I just feel like we all need those spaces because without them, life gets rough pretty quick. And even frankly, for people who have a fuck ton of money, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, you can say what the fuck you want.
Okay, great. Like people
Tucker Carlson.
Right. But like that isolation, right, might happen to an immigrant worker who's far away from family, but also like super wealthy people who feel like they can't have real relationships with people because everything is about money. And so it's crazy, like how that theme of isolation shows up in all sorts of different places.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I very rarely think about is the plight of the uber wealthy. But they're people too. They're people too, and they deserve
people too. But also their decisions often end up like being really difficult for everyone else. So
I was just about to say that they deserve friends too, but honestly, not necessarily. I mean, if you're hoarding all that wealth, that could be. I mean,
right.
I'm not going to go on this long. Because people have heard enough of how much of my criticisms of Mr. Elon Musk. But I will say this.
Seriously.
If Elon Musk had decided to take $44 billion and to build hospitals, schools, feed starving people.
For real.
I mean, the list goes on and on. What could have been done with $44 billion? He would be like a beloved figure in society, and he chose to buy Twitter out of narcissism, and so now he's one of the most hated people on the planet, rightfully so. But so I know that was so far. You were saying all this beautiful shit, and I came out here and said this horribly negative thing.
No, but I think it actually reveals something, because like when we're by ourselves, I think the quality of our decision making is more likely to become selfish, right? It's less likely to embody the values that, when we really reflect, are the most important to us. And that's another value of being not just in community, but like in a small group where people are up close enough to your life to know what's going on. And that, people will say, I don't know, I just watched like John Mulaney's special, and he's talking about, this intervention from these friends, both in person and on Zoom, because of his addiction. And like, what an expression of love that a moment like that is. But it's a confronting moment, right? But it means like, hey, we believe that like you can be better than you are being right now, right? Like that you can be healthier, that you can be more, more responsible. And like, if we don't have relationships of people supporting us and holding us accountable, you run off the rails and you buy Twitter for $44 billion.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, I still feel like I should once again apologize, because you were saying all these things, and I was like, oh, here's an opportunity for me once again to air my grievances of this Twitter CEO. And that is not what I meant to do.
Not at all.
But I was gonna say, it was it's going back into like, this is more about like the religious aspect of these things. So like, I know that I live in a supposedly very religious country. That's the impression I get from like very loud religious extremism that politicians try to push in the media, like that. So you're like, oh, this nation must be very religious because this is all you hear, but on a personal level, I really don't encounter much religion. I was even thinking when I try to recall all the weddings that I've been to, which is, been so many weddings, and
great example.
I can't remember any that happened in a church. But actually, by the way, if you're listening to this and I was at your wedding and it wasn't a church, I actually do remember yours. I just remembered your wedding. But but other than that, what I was trying to
baby
say.
brain. Yeah, you're good. But it's such a good example of just this like epic shift, right? Like this real generational change. And I love the example of weddings, because so many of us are in the place where we're going to them and seeing that the shift of maybe doing it outside, having a friend officiate, right? Like, and so much of that reveals, I think, the bigger pattern, which is that people do not trust religious institutions to be the moral like interlocutor in their life, right? Because of the sexual abuse scandals in the Catholic Church, the financial scandals in evangelical Christian church, right? Like, and the list goes on in every religious context, frankly. So people are very skeptical for good reason. And the politics that you mentioned is a big part of that. In the 90s, you had these organizations like the Moral Majority and Focus on the Family that weaponized Christianity in particular as a tool for like, anti-women, anti-gay, anti all sorts of things. And anyone who didn't fit the mold was immediately cast as an outsider. And so for the first time in recorded history now in the US, less than half the population attends a religious congregation. So even though people who's, they'll still say, well, I'm Methodist or I'm Catholic, but they're not going to church in the same way. And this is a side note, but a really interesting relationship in terms of the numbers of Trump voters overwhelmingly skewed towards people who claimed a Christian identity but didn't go to a community. And so I think this isolation and this desire for belonging that we all have a lot of people were fulfilling by being part of the MAGA movement or being part of, QAnon, right? So that's a whole phenomenon in itself that's interesting. But at the same time, you're having more and more people, like it sounds like you and I both kind of fit into this category. I didn't grow up with anything, so I didn't leave anything, but I also don't really belong to anything, even though I'm so interested in these questions, in part because my religious, spiritual life, it doesn't fit into one box. I grew up in a sort of pagan-y, Christian-y context in England, and I've had deep friendships and wonderful mentors from within the Jewish tradition. And then, there's little bits and pieces like a Buddhist meditation practice that I had for a while. So like all of that kind of makes me, but like I don't fit into a place. And so what we're seeing, if you look at the big picture, is more and more personalization when it comes to your spiritual life. And people are putting together a mix of things that fits them. Now, that's beautiful on the one hand, because you get something that's really personalized and fits your life. But on the other hand, the more you personalize, the less you share.
Yes.
And so, right, that then becomes this contributing factor to that isolation and loneliness that we were talking about, particularly in our spirituality. And that, again, was one of the two big things that we heard when we were asking people about the nearness. People were saying, I feel kind of isolated in my spiritual life. Like maybe I'm journaling, maybe I'm meditating, maybe I'm going on a retreat or yoga teacher training or whatever. But I don't really have like a community of people who I explore this with. And explore is a key word, because a lot of people, I think, in our place are like interested in the conversations and the questions and the practices even, but like we don't want to like arrive somewhere and then I'm a member forever and now I'm on the committee to look after the building, you know what I mean? So that was one key thing. And the second thing was like, as I'm piecing together my own spiritual life, it feels a little bit scattered. Like I'm kind of drawing from all over the place and I'm not sure if it adds up to anything. And so trying to give people even just like a structure for exploration was really key to what we're trying to do, because I think otherwise it's overwhelming and a little bit like, oh, is this legit? And I think a lot of us are in that place right now because we're no longer trusting these big institutions in the same way that previous generations did.
I'm a little bit curious, like when you were saying, describing just kind of your childhood era of this, and I don't know if we had a similar thing, but it sounds like it. Like so, like my mom, when she was raising me, she was a journalist and an academic, and but I think in her childhood, like she was like the first generation that wasn't doing she was kind of doing her own thing, but like in her childhood, they were Christians, and then by the time I came around, I've been like, I remember one time she was like, we're going to go to church. And I was like, okay.
What?
And I went to a Sunday school. I remember that. Like, I don't know how many, maybe went a couple times. And then, and then not long, after that, she was like, oh, we're going to be Buddhist now. And I was like, okay, which is kind of, we're just kind of picking and choosing and like trying it out. And so I just picked up on the vibe of that. And I was like, okay, well, I really like that style of it. There's a word for it, and I don't. I'm sure you know it, but it's that religion where it's like all paths lead to the same truth. And I kind
Baha'i,
of
maybe.
Anyway, it's I don't have a name for what I'm doing, but it's like I almost maybe consider myself a mythologist in that I really like the mythology. I like the stories that are in there. I love what the teachings of Joseph Campbell. So that's kind of like where I stand with that. Does that do you feel like in the same way?
Totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. And I think one of the reasons we might gravitate toward Campbell is because Campbell makes this interesting turn where he says, okay, it may not be that these things are like literally true, but what's important is that we have these myths and we have these rituals because they help us be fully human. And that's what I see a lot in our kind of generational context is like, yeah, we know it's not that, but not doing anything is like also not it. And so how do we construct the phrase that often you hear is kind of this idea of re-enchanting the world. Like how do we reconnect with spirituality and the rituals of community life in a way that are life sustaining, but also don't demand us to like pretend things are real that aren't. But also make space for the mysteries of life that we don't fully understand, because there's a lot of shit that science doesn't know. So I that's the kind of place that I see so many people in. And yeah, some people might use like more like horoscopy language and practices. Some people are kind of like at the edges of a Christian tradition or a Buddhist tradition, or they're making, they're diving into some like interesting mythopoetic practice, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I think all of us are in that place of exploring, and what Campbell gives us are a couple of frameworks, right? Like the hero's journey that help us put ourselves into these bigger stories in a way that are open but still guiding us somewhere.
Um, I might be misquoting, but I think I'll get the gist pretty closely.
Yeah.
I believe Bill Moyers described Joseph Campbell as the least religious person he'd ever met, but the most spiritual
Oh, I love that.
person he'd
I
ever
love
met.
that if you have, if I know, I'm sure you have, but for folks listening, if you haven't listened to their conversation, the Moyers Campbell series, it's a beautiful, beautiful series of interviews.
Oh yeah, check it out. It is at your local library, and you can get it on an audiobook.
Exactly.
Easy. Go do it. It's free. All right, let's get into something I have to say. Is that I'm gonna have to say that
Yeah.
eating food is probably in my top 3 activities.
The best thing.
But even as much as I love food, eating a meal can be kind of mundane and mindless. Just that's how it kind of gets sometimes. And what is the concept of sacred eating, or what is it for? And I know that it's also maybe part of like when you were speaking about building communities, that it belongs in that category as well.
Big time. Yeah. I mean, and it's so interesting how COVID has, I think, clarified some things. So there are some things like, hey, recording this podcast, which are just fine online. And in fact, some things are better digital, but there are some things, dancing together, singing together, eating together, right? Like massage.
Yeah.
You just have to be IRL, you have to be together in person. And what so often those practices are about a quality of presence together. And so for me, sacred eating, again, it's less about the food, just like with the reading, it's less about the text and more about how we engage with the food and each other while we're sharing a meal. And so I grew up around our dinner table. We would all hold hands and we would sing this little song about blessing the food. It wasn't a religious one. It was just saying blessings on the blossom, blessings on the fruit, blessings on the leaf and stem, blessings on the root, blessings on the meal, and peace upon the earth. And it was just something we did every time.
Yeah.
And it was a moment in which, without anyone saying it, it was like, we're together, we're a family, and it matters that we're doing this together. Oh, I feel emotional just saying that out loud because now I live far away from them and I miss them so much. And it's like, they're just little rituals of belonging. And so I wonder if this will change for you actually as you like step into parenthood. Is like, when you're suddenly responsible for creating the culture of a family and thinking about, what are the rituals that help us know who we are and whose we are? A moment of eating together is a beautiful moment to do that. And some families do, highs and lows, or roses, buds, and thorns, or just a moment of quiet or a breath together. Like, whatever. It doesn't matter to me what it is, but it does matter to me that we do something. And I now sing that song with my husband when we have friends over for dinner. And I can't tell you, the first face that happens is like, huh? And then it's like, and everyone always is like, I love it, And so I think this is just like Campbell. It's a moment in which we get to re-enchant the world by doing something silly, like just singing a song together before we take a first bite. And so, that for me is what sacred eating is about, is that the food becomes a tool for reminding us of what's most important.
Interestingly, just kind of in what you were saying there, you brought me to probably, so earlier when I said when I was reading your book, it just happened to be the perfect time. Like, and you kind of just hit the nail on the head right there, is that, I've never been responsible for a child. I've, and at the time, he wasn't born yet, but he was coming. I knew he was coming.
Yeah. It wasn't a surprise.
And I was like, and I was thinking, and it was truly one of the main, as I was going through the chapters, I was thinking like, like this is now my responsibility to create ritual. It's important. It has to exist. What rituals do I think are important? What rituals do I already have? Like, it's the kind of stuff that I never really made much conscious effort to identify or identify the lack of. So, and that's one of the things when I was reading, I was like, God, I gotta, are we gonna stop being, am I gonna stop being the kind of person who eats dinner on the coffee table watching TV, and am I gonna start eating dinner at a real table?
Right.
That's up in the air.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. Still TBD. Honestly, until they're 3, who knows? Yeah, exactly. but it's for real. And one of the things that I do think is harder for us is that as we've stepped away from these religious traditions, we have to make things up, or we have to work at interpreting or creating or reinterpreting rituals that we grew up with. And if you lived within a kind of clear lane of a religious tradition, you didn't have to, you just did the thing. Now, the danger of that is it becomes rote and meaningless and dull, which for a lot of people did. But the benefit is that you don't have to go through the exhausting process of figuring out for each thing, what are we going to do here? You just know what to do because that's the way it's done. And so I do think it's worth saying that there are, in this landscape that we're in now, it's like there are some losses. This is hard to do by ourselves. We're literally running a little pilot, a project later this month for parents who want to bring more ritual into their home. It's for kids a little older than you, but so many parents are asking this question, and so I think there's a real need to support each other in it.
And like we were saying, especially if you're not plugged into a religion that's going to give you this, because that's like it's like you're a fully loaded situation. You're like, oh well, I'm Catholic, we just do whatever they do, all the pomp and circumstances already provided for us. I do have another thing, and this is kind of this, not that this other stuff couldn't be categorized as possibly an intersection with politics, but there is one thing that I do think for me personally intersects with politics, and I swear I'm not going to talk about fucking Elon Musk again.
I was going to say I'm like waiting for the Musk moment.
No. I mean, although he's you know what? No, just he doesn't deserve another moment of my attention.
Exactly.
But I was going to say is like, so the environment. That's where I'm going. We're going with nature, and so the environment is the number one political issue that I get involved with personally. And I not that I don't. I mean, obviously, I care about human rights. I care about a lot of. I care about somebody. But this is environment's my thing. I love animals. I love rivers. I love mountains. And I want to, and the rivers and the mountains and the animals can't speak for themselves, and it's our responsibility. We're the stewards of this planet. It's our responsibility to do it for them. And I truly wish that more people felt the same way as me about it. And I wish that and a lot of people do. I don't feel alone in this. I feel like I'm part of a gigantic, enormous movement and community. But at the same time, I wish it was bigger. And what I was going to say is, historically, people that have a deep spiritual connection to nature have always been better stewards of the land and more in harmony with their ecosystem. And you talk about this connection. How can people find ways to break free from the mechanized, capitalized grind of modern life and develop a spiritual connection to nature? And also maybe aside from what I just said, what's some of the importance of that connection?
Yeah, that's beautifully said. It's funny. I was at an event last night. This is a New York thing, which I'm like, okay, there's a benefit of living here. It was this wonderful performance and conversation between a Hawaiian elder who led and chanted a series of dances and songs about kind of traditional stories in the Hawaiian Islands, and a young environmental scientist who was also a fisherman. And they were talking about the relationship between, I love this phrase, they talked about the natural and cultural resources of their people in protecting various elements of the land and sea. And I think the young fisherman scientist said something so true, which relates directly to this conversation. He said his recommendation was, well, you have to love the place. And so his thing was like, go for a walk, go for a swim, like go be in your environment and love it, because when you love it, it'll be easier to protect it. And I think what that points to is this difference between looking at the natural world as something that's separate from us, that we kind of get to use for our own purposes, whether it's mining or oil extraction, whatever it is, it's there for us. And he was, moving towards this different way of thinking about it, of like, Joanna Macy calls it world as lover, this idea that you have this, like, that you love this place, right? That it's meaningful to you. And her final stage, kind of moving through these different ways of thinking, is to not see yourself even as just loving it, but that you are it, right? Like nature is us and we are nature. And I think when you enter that way of thinking, that paradigm, right, a tree being cut down is you being cut down. And so suddenly it's not like me protecting the rainforest, but I am the rainforest protecting itself. And I do not live in that state of mind most of the time. It's really hard because it's right. We feel separate from the natural world. We just do. That's how we live our lives. When there's ants in my kitchen, I'm like, get out of here.
Yeah.
Like,
That's hard to, I mean, we're not saints.
Right. But as a practice, this was something I did during COVID, looking at the same tree really in depth every day, or like coming up really close to a leaf or even the palm of your hand and like looking at it with this kind of sense of reverence and awe, suddenly shifts. And it often helps if you go really small or really big, right? Like night sky, or a view of the ocean, or like something that really takes you out of yourself, either in terms of a bigness or in terms of smallness. Like we get out of our kind of egoic little prison and into this mindset of connection, and into a connection to all living things, and that we are part of that and responsible for it. And so I think that's the way in which, there's some beautiful examples of using this as a political tool as well. In the UK, there was a program taking members of parliament, elected representatives, to just go help and like be in a river environment and like help do some scientific research or clean up something, and like just spend the day with the river and then have a conversation about the environmental policies. Totally different from when it's just a piece of paper on a desk and we're talking about abstract ideas. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why, but I think when we have experience, when we have relationship, when we have attention on that sense of connection, that whole conversation is a really different one.
Absolutely. And I think I hold certain beliefs that I think some people at first glance would be like, well, that's kind of an extreme belief, where I say things like, and I'm not the only one saying this. Like, I mean, there's people that are in the UN saying this,
right?
That I'm saying that a river should be given,
absolutely,
the same rights as
absolutely. And they, in New Zealand, that's starting to happen, and elsewhere as well. And it makes total sense. Like, why are the human voices the only ones that matter when everything is impacted? And so, and it's really interesting. There's such different approaches on this. One way is to look at the economic value of a rainforest or a river and say, this is how much, in dollar totals, how much value it creates to the economy, to us as humans. Now, the danger is then that you actually just start seeing it as a product rather than itself an inherently worthy thing that has dignity and sacredness. And so a different paradigm, the one that you're pointing to, is to say, no, like there is an essential inherent goodness in this river existing, and any policies or any business practices that damage this landscape are damaging a living thing, and that should not be allowed. And so, I love that you're pointing to that, because it's a really exciting space in kind of environmental law. Yeah.
Whenever I bring up that those type of laws that I hope do get enacted, I always think, have you seen Spirited Away?
Yes. Yeah.
I love the movie. It's beautiful, and I just love the river spirit.
Totally.
The river has a consciousness, and I mean, and does it not? I mean,
absolutely. My grandmother, when I was very young, would take me walking through the forest near where she lived, and she would just talk about like seeing the spirits of the forest. And like even now, I'm like, she's dead a little while now, but like even now I'm like, well, I know she wasn't seeing them, but maybe she was seeing something. And I'm so grateful for that gift because it just allows for it's a different type of reality, and there's space for that. Yeah.
I think we could tie it back into when we were talking about the power of myth and Joseph
Mm,
Campbell
mm,
and his lectures, where, and I know that someone who might be extremely inflexibly religious might be offended to
mm,
hear Joseph Campbell say the teachings of your religion are myths, and they
mm,
are the exact same. So here in this Native American myth that
mm,
I've that I found from the Cherokee,
mm,
this is what they believe. This is the exact same thing as this Bible story that you believe, which is the exact same
mhm.
thing as this story that is in the Quran. And what he's saying is like none of these are not factual historical accounts, but they all have value, and they all have great value if only you could
Yeah.
see it that way. Is this that
Right.
these are fundamental human truths. These are the things that this is the invisible world. It's the world beyond what we can see, but it is just as true and tangible as the world we can see here in my
Yeah.
laptop and this microphone. It's
That's right. That's
so
right.
I think
I love it.
the reason I brought that up is when you're saying your grandmother talking about
Yeah.
the forest spirits. You don't have to truly believe that there's
Right.
that there are fairies or
Right.
whatnot
Totally.
to understand that it can be exactly as true that there are forest spirits. It's just
100%.
if you can just open your
100%.
mind to another way of thinking. I don't know. I
I love it.
believe.
I love that. I love that so much. Yeah. And it's there's so much to say on this. I'm totally with you. I think if you want to be mechanistic about it, it's like it's another way of experiencing reality that makes life more beautiful. And like,
Yeah.
isn't that worth it?
Yeah.
You know, so why not? Yeah. Yeah.
Casper, I got to tell you something, man. We are getting dangerously close to the lightning round. Um,
Okay,
I don't know
great.
if you know how the lightning round works on this podcast. This is the part where I ask you questions just like super fast, and you
Great.
just kind of just gut reaction.
Deal.
I did not write this lightning round. I actually recently I haven't been writing any of them, so they've been getting. So I never know what we're gonna get.
Wow. All
This was
right.
written by co-producer Colleen. This will be the first time I'm reading it, and so I will be with you
I love it.
alongside you, and maybe we'll do a couple together
Nice.
if we get stumped, because this I'm looking at it right now for the first time, and it looks like this might be. Some people really get such easy lightning rounds, and some people just get the hardest ones. Well, we'll see which one you got. Okay, this lightning round. For each, sorry, for each of the fictional characters, say how they either do a great job of incorporating sacred ritual into their lives, or
Ooh,
say how they need to do a better job.
nice. Okay.
Okay, this is. Let's just go ahead and get into it. Beavis and Butthead.
I have never seen or read any Beavis and Butthead, so
Oh,
I'm gonna guess that they have a little work to do, but they certainly have a really strong and beautiful relationship, which I'm sure is ritualized in various ways.
yeah. Well, I mean, I I'm surprised you've never seen Beavis and Butthead. I'm not going to demand you go see it. It's not that crucial. But the ritual of Beavis and Butthead is to sit down and watch MTV
There
and
you
talk
go.
over it.
I love it.
I wouldn't say that's a poor ritual. I think that's a decent
It works for
decent
them.
yeah.
Exactly. Let's not yuck their yum.
All right. All right, here's one that's kind of interesting. Barney.
Oh man, you're really catching me here because I didn't grow up in the US. So all of
Oh
these
yeah,
kind of
this oh
American.
no. Oh no, I believe these are all American
This
as
is the
shit.
purple dinosaur, right?
Well, okay, so Barney employs many rituals, like the cleanup
Ah,
song, clean up everybody
nice.
everywhere. Clean up
Nice.
everybody, do your share. So every
I
time you
love
some
that. Songs is the way forward. I love Bonnie. Go Bonnie.
all right. Barney, you're doing great with your rituals. I think they're bringing out a new Barney, but apparently I thank God Tucker Carlson's gone. I think he was upset and telling everyone that
Ugh,
the new Barney was going to be woke and therefore don't show your kids this basic educational show. Uh,
bye,
Cookie
Tucker.
Monster.
Oh,
You must know Cookie
I
Monster.
I certainly know Cookie Monster. I feel like Cookie Monster like I maybe doesn't quite have the eating rituals, but just the eating.
Yeah. He does
So
yeah, he
maybe
does not seem to ritualize his eating at all.
I don't think he's very present and engaged. Maybe he offers a blessing before each cookie. Maybe Cookie Monster would really enjoy the cookie.
I
But
would
I'm right
yeah.
with him. It's hard to do.
I I follow Cookie Monster on Twitter and I fucking love it. But yeah, I would say maybe to improve the ritual, Cookie Monster could maybe try to like I don't know, make it a community thing. Now the thing is he doesn't want to. It's
Yeah,
really it's a
he's like
pure
it's for
thing
him.
between it's between
Right,
him and the cookie. So maybe it is a good ritual.
exactly.
All right, moving forward. This might have made it over to the UK. Dexter.
Mm. This oh God, and not the murderous
Yes,
TV show. Oh,
this
that one.
the serial killer that kills
Okay,
serial
the serial
killers.
killer.
He has a
Oh,
very
he
profound
kills
ritual.
serious killer. Oh, he kills serial killers. I did not know that. Um,
I feel so bad that I'm asking you a lightning round. You literally have never seen any of these characters.
I was like, if you, yeah, there's plenty of other categories or characters I would know, but these
I
ones I
can
don't.
tell you Dexter's ritual, and you can just
Yeah,
go, okay.
is okay.
So once Dexter has like identified a serial killer, so he is
Yeah,
a serial killer, but he's like a good serial killer. So
interesting.
when he catches another one, he doesn't kill them right away. He like catches them and then like takes them like back to like a lair. At which point
Mm,
he like shows them like photographs of people they've killed and like kind of like lectures them on why they were bad
wow.
and then kills them.
Gotcha. Interesting. So like do what I say, not do what I do. Okay.
Yes.
I think there's some work for Dexter to do here. Maybe a little self-reflection. Maybe we need a little Dexter intervention.
Yeah. It's hard to say. Hard to say. I'm not even I can't believe this one's okay. You know what? You can even just say pass on this next one. Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
So I did watch Buffy.
All right. All right. We got one. We got
Yeah,
one on
exactly.
the
We've got
list.
one. We've got one. It's a long time ago. I just remember being fascinated by Willow. I liked her so much. And yeah. Okay. Let me think. What about their ritual lives? Well, I feel like any high school has plenty of rituals.
Yeah, certainly.
They certainly had interesting texts and ritual practices. I think Buffy could actually teach us, a little class on ritual activity amongst the paranormal. So I feel like, yeah, thumbs up for Buffy.
All right,
Yeah.
Buffy, you pass. We're almost through this, I promise. Oh, this is a strong there's a slim chance you're gonna have seen this. Ragnar Lothbrok, the Viking chieftain from Vikings.
It's a blank for me, but I'm
Okay.
sure he has great hair.
Yeah, he does. He's got the sides shaved, long ponytail from the top.
Nice.
Pretty sick.
It's a strong look. It's a strong
Yeah.
look. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm sure there's some excellent drinking songs. There's some excellent
One ritual like of the Vikings during that era would be like when they would go on their raids, they would like sacrifice a goat to Odin.
Right.
And then they would go and like completely conquer Paris or like London with like 12 guys. So there's could be something to be said for sacrificing livestock to Odin, because these guys seem to be extraordinarily successful with inferior numbers.
I am gonna avoid getting on the record on that one.
Okay.
Oh boy.
I do not advocate killing animals
I was gonna say, and raping and pillaging, probably not top of the list, but
Vikings look cooler on paper than once you really start
pretty terrifying. Pretty terrifying.
Very last one, absolute last one, and then we're done with the lightning round. The Fast and the Furious crew.
Oh, I just think of Vin Diesel being so closeted, but that's probably not what we're talking about. Again, a movie series I have not seen. Wow, I feel like Colleen and my pop culture knowledge is severely not overlapping. But any race often has a great kind of series of rituals around starting and finishing and celebrating. So I'm sure there's some strong ritual activity there.
I will shout out one ritual that I from Fast and the Furious, because I of course have seen every single one of those idiotic movies, and more than one time. And they have a ritual, so they all have cookouts at the end of like every, at the end after the adventure is over, and they're all, they all have a cookout, and whoever is the last, whoever's late to the table has to say grace.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
I feel like
I like that.
fine.
I like that. That's nice. That's good.
Okay, Casper, man, I have one last question. It's the most important question of the day. Where can people find you? Where can they read your book, listen to your podcast, just everything that you have out there?
Thanks. Yeah. Well, if folks are interested in joining a small group, check out the Nearness, thenearness.com. We'll have journeys starting in July and again in October. And you can find me at Casper TK on Twitter and on Instagram, or caspertk.com is my website. And the podcast is called Harry Potter and the Sacred Text.
I'm gonna have to check that out. I've never read the book, so it'll actually be like pretty wild for me.
You'll be like the Colleen of my life. Thanks so much for having me, Doug. Really, really great to be with you. And yeah, good luck in the journey of fatherhood.
Thank you, Casper.